Kennedy didn't warm up. He didn't build toward it. He looked directly at the Attorney General, set down his notes, and asked the one question that nobody in that chamber had the courage to ask before him. Did you question him about the children? Bondi didn't blink, didn't shift, didn't reach for water. No. One syllable. Flat. Delivered with the practiced composure of someone who had rehearsed for every possible attack, except the one that just landed. The room didn't react. That was the most telling thing. There was no gasp, no murmur, no shuffling of papers. Just the particular silence that settles over a space when everyone in it reaches the same conclusion at the same moment. When the implication of a single word becomes so clear that processing it out loud feels unnecessary. 8 seconds. Nobody moved. Because that question wasn't random. It wasn't political theater. It was the direct result of something a sitting member of the United States Cabinet had put on the record in a major American newspaper weeks before this hearing. Howard Lutnick is the Secretary of Commerce of the United States. He was confirmed by the Senate. He serves at the pleasure of the President, and he shares something unusual with Jeffrey Epstein. For years, the wall between their Manhattan townhouses was the only thing separating them. That proximity apparently gave Lutnick a perspective that most people in Washington have been careful to avoid stating publicly. He called Epstein the greatest blackmailer who ever lived. Not a criminal, not a predator. The greatest blackmailer who ever lived. Those are not the words of someone speaking in generalities. That is the language of someone who believes he understands the architecture of what Epstein built and how precisely it functioned. Lutnick didn't stop there. He described the mechanism, private rooms, massage appointments that weren't massage appointments, recordings made without consent, a system designed not for pleasure, but for leverage, for control over men whose names and reputations made them simultaneously powerful and permanently vulnerable. And then, the sentence that Kennedy had read so many times, the ink had worn thin on the page. When asked how so many prominent men kept returning to Epstein, despite knowing what those rooms were, Lutnick didn't say they were naive. He didn't say they were deceived. He said they participated, not attended, not visited, participated. That word carries a specific weight in the context of what Lutnick was describing. It means knowledge. It means presence. It means continuation despite full awareness of what was happening inside those rooms. And at the center of those rooms, according to Lutnick's own account, were children. Kennedy had gone to this hearing carrying that interview like a loaded question. He'd spent weeks mapping the distance between what Lutnick had said publicly and what the Department of Justice had done with it. The distance was total. When he asked Bondi whether she had reviewed Lutnick's full statement, her right hand moved almost imperceptibly toward her hair. A small gesture. The kind that happens before a person says something they know isn't enough. She had seen a clip, not the full transcript, not a summary, not a briefing prepared by investigators who had reviewed the complete record. A clip. Kennedy's jaw tightened. He filed the answer away without comment. Had the department interviewed Secretary Lutnick? No. The press gallery, which had been allowing itself small movements, a shifted weight, a quiet note, went completely still. Phones down, keyboards silent, every camera holding. Did the department plan to? What followed was a masterclass in saying nothing using complete sentences. Bondi explained that if the secretary wished to speak with investigators, or if the Bureau determined such a conversation was warranted, appropriate channels existed for that to occur. Kennedy stared at her for 3 seconds without blinking. A sitting cabinet official, he said, his voice dropping in a way that made it more dangerous, not less, publicly describes Epstein's blackmail network. Names the method, names the rooms. States clearly that children were present and that powerful men chose to walk through those doors anyway. and the response of the United States Department of Justice was to leave a business card on the table and wait for him to call. Bondi began to respond. Kennedy had already moved to the second charge. He walked her through a hypothetical. What would a special counsel require to access the private phone records of a sitting United States senator? Bondi outlined the process: probable cause, judicial review, oversight mechanisms, a process designed to protect elected officials from institutional overreach. Kennedy nodded, said it sounded careful, said it sounded like genuine protection for genuine people. Then he told her that 8 sitting senators had reportedly had their communications accessed through a routine administrative subpoena. No judge, no probable cause threshold, no warrant. A form submitted, and the phone companies complied. The room had already been quiet. That made it quieter. Kennedy's point required no elaboration. An institution capable of moving with that kind of speed when it has institutional motivation had looked at a cabinet secretary's published account of a blackmail empire built on the documented abuse of children and decided to wait. Bondi said she could not discuss specifics of ongoing or potential matters. That answer told the room everything it needed to know. Kennedy let her finish. Then, without raising his voice, without looking at the cameras, without any of the theatrical gestures that tend to dilute a moment like this, he said what everyone in that room was already thinking. "This isn't classified, General. It's in the newspaper." No one laughed. No one needed to, because what Kennedy had just made visible wasn't a legal gap or a procedural failure. It was a decision. Somebody at the Department of Justice had read Howard Lutnick's interview. Somebody had seen the words, "greatest blackmailer who ever lived." Somebody had processed the phrase they participated alongside the phrase, "children were in those rooms." And somebody had decided that none of it rose to the level of a phone call. That is not bureaucratic inertia. That is a choice with consequences. Epstein didn't build leverage by accident. He built it systematically. Rooms arranged, recordings made, evidence accumulated. And if Lutnick's account is accurate, and no one at the Department of Justice has seen fit to challenge it, then somewhere, on a drive or in a vault, or inside a sealed archive that has never been reviewed by anyone with the authority to act on it, documentation of what happened in those rooms still exists. Documentation that names names. Kennedy's last words before he yielded were delivered quietly enough that 2 reporters in the back of the gallery missed them entirely. The children deserve better than this. Nobody pushed back. Not from Bondi's side of the table. Not from anywhere in that room. Because there is no professional, legal, or institutional language that constitutes an adequate response to that sentence in that context. Bondi had arrived at this hearing prepared. She had survived tough rooms before. She had answers for every technical challenge, every procedural accusation, every claim about redactions and timelines and document releases. She did not have an answer for Kennedy's question, because the question wasn't technical. It wasn't procedural. It was the kind of question that strips away every layer of institutional language until only one thing remains. A cabinet secretary told the world what he saw. He named the rooms. He named the mechanism. He said children were involved. He said powerful men walked in knowing exactly what they were walking into. And the Attorney General of the United States had seen a clip. That gap between what Lutnick published and what the department chose to do with it is not a legal ambiguity. It is not a resource question. It is not a matter of evidentiary thresholds or prosecutorial discretion. It is the distance between accountability and the appearance of it. Kennedy understood that when he walked in, he made sure everyone else understood it when he walked out. Somewhere in this city, a man who once shared a wall with Jeffrey Epstein and described his operation in national print has still never been formally asked what he knows about the children. The Attorney General said no. Kennedy heard it. The room heard it. The country heard it. Now what happens next? That depends entirely on whether the people with the power to ask the questions decide that the children Lutnick described are worth more than the silence that has surrounded their names since the night those doors first closed. So tell us, was this a failure of the system? Or was the system working exactly as someone needed it to? Drop failure or cover-up in the comments.